From a driver who ended up in trouble with the police to another who lost everything, including his girlfriend, to his own teammate. These are the F1 drivers who lost everything. Let's start with a world champion who seemed destined to make history, but made one of the worst career choices in Formula 1. We're talking about Jacques Villeneuve, a driver who not only carried a respected last name, but also had undeniable talent. When he arrived in F1 in 1996, Villeneuve didn't take long to show what he was capable of. Right in his rookie season, he fought for the championship all the way to the final race against Damon Hill. And the following year, he made history. In 1997, Villeneuve won the World Championship with Williams beating Michael Schumacher in one of the most dramatic seasons of the decade.
9 on that last lap. I wonder if he's got something like a slow puncture or some kind of gear shift problem, because Villeneuve is all over him. Look, he's going through. Oh, yes. I don't think.
Out goes Michael Schumacher.
That didn't work. That didn't work, Michael. You hit the wrong part of him, my friend. I don't think that will cause Villeneuve a problem.
Michael Schumacher out. Now
he was young, a world champion, and had the world at his feet. But that's when everything started going downhill. After his title, Jacques made a decision that's still remembered as one of the biggest mistakes in F1, leaving Williams to join BAR, a brand new team with no history at all. At the time, he described the move as a smart strategic choice, but the entire paddock saw it as a complete leap of faith. And it didn't take long for them to be proven right. While legendary teams like Ferrari and McLaren were fighting for wins and titles, Villeneuve was stuck at the back of the grid with BAR, a world champion, fighting for low positions. And as if that wasn't enough, Jacques started to build a reputation for arrogance. Unnecessary comments about other drivers, controversial interviews, and open disdain for the media started to strain his image. He went from charismatic champion to problematic champion. By the early 2000s, his career was in freefall. BAR rarely gave him a competitive car, and his attitude off the track wasn't helping either. Villeneuve even returned to teams like Sauber, but he never came close to performing like a world champion again. The result? From F1's biggest star to a forgotten name. A champion who should have been remembered alongside Senna, Prost, and Schumacher ended up being the guy who threw away his prime years on a failed gamble. Today, Villeneuve does race commentary and occasionally shows up in the paddock, but his F1 journey stands as a classic example of how bad decisions and arrogance can bury even a world champion's career. When it comes to talent, the Verstappen family has plenty of it. But now let's talk about one who had everything to be a champion and ended up making headlines for all the wrong reasons. We're talking about Jos Verstappen. Yes, Max Verstappen's father. Between 1994 and 2003, Jos was seen as one of the most promising talents of his generation. He was teammates with none other than Michael Schumacher at Benetton, one of the top teams at the time. He had speed, skill, discipline, and many believed he would become the next big F1 name. But what happened off the track completely destroyed his reputation. The first major scandal came in 2000. Jos was accused of assault after an incident at a karting track where someone was seriously injured. A Belgian court convicted him, but he received a suspended 5-year sentence. Even so, his image was already damaged. And the problems didn't stop there. In 2008, Jos made headlines again, this time for sending threatening text messages and violating a restraining order. He was fined and received another suspended sentence. With each new case, one thing became clear. There was a pattern of aggressive behavior. But in 2012 came the most devastating blow. Jos Verstappen was arrested in the Netherlands, accused of attempted murder after allegedly hitting his ex-girlfriend with a car. The accusations were extremely serious. He was released after 2 weeks when the charges were dropped for lack of evidence, but the damage was already done. At that point, his career both on and off the track was completely destroyed. Now let's talk about one of the most humiliating stories in F1 history. A driver who achieved his dream of reaching Formula 1 but lost everything in just 4 races. In 2006, Formula 1 welcomed a new team, Super Aguri, a Japanese squad that brought hope and national pride to Japan. And behind the wheel was Yuji Ide, a 31-year-old driver coming from Japanese racing series backed by strong sponsors. The expectations were sky high, a Japanese driver in a Japanese team, but from his debut in Australia the problems were clear. Ide managed to finish the race in 13th place, but he was way off the pace. In Bahrain, things got worse. Spins, trouble keeping the car on the track, and another disappointing race. It became obvious Ide wasn't ready for Formula 1. And then came the disaster at Imola during the San Marino Grand Prix. On the very first lap, Ide attempted a clumsy overtake on Christian Albers and hit him on the side. Albers' car was launched into the air and rolled several times before stopping upside down. It was a terrifying crash. Albers walked away unharmed, but the image went viral. Ide was labelled a danger on the track. The FIA summoned him for questioning and issued an official warning. Team boss Aguri Suzuki tried to defend him, saying Ide hadn't had enough testing time, but no one bought it, and the pressure inside the paddock grew. Team drivers and even the FIA questioned whether it was safe to race alongside Ide. At the next race in Nürburgring, the decision came. The FIA recommended that Super Aguri replaced Ide with a more experienced driver. First, he was demoted to third driver, but days later came the final blow. On May 10, 2006, the FIA officially revoked his super license. It was official, Yuji Ide was banned from Formula 1. In just 4 races, he went from living the dream to an absolute nightmare. His F1 career lasted less than 2 months and ended in the worst possible way. To this day, Yuji Ide remains one of the very few drivers in history to have their super license revoked. And if you think that's shocking, wait till you hear the next story. But first, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Now, the story of a 2-time world champion who walked away at his peak only to watch his replacement win the title that could have been his. We're talking about Emerson Fittipaldi, the legendary Brazilian driver who threw away the chance to become a 3-time world champion because of a decision made from the heart. For that, we need to go back to 1972. At just 25 years old, Emerson Fittipaldi became the youngest world champion in history driving for Lotus. 2 years later, in 1974, he won his second title, this time with McLaren, beating Clay Ragazzoni in a tight battle. In 1975, he finished runner-up behind Niki Lauda. He was at his absolute peak, racing for one of the best teams with everything in place to win more titles. But at the end of 1975, the bombshell dropped. Emerson would leave McLaren to drive for his family's new team, the Copersucar Fittipaldi, founded by his brother Wilson. The F1 world couldn't believe it. Who would leave a championship-winning team to join a brand new, inexperienced one with no results or infrastructure? The answer was simple: loyalty and patriotism. Emerson believed in the dream of building a competitive Brazilian team. It was an act of national pride and brotherly support, but that decision came at a huge cost. His seat at McLaren went to James Hunt, who in 1976 won the World Championship, a title that could have easily been Emerson's. While Hunt made history, Emerson struggled. In 1976, his best results with Copersucar were 3 sixth places, which for a 2-time world champion was humiliating. Still, he kept trying. He spent 5 seasons with the team, chasing a dream that never came true. His best result in that period was a 2nd place in 1978, but overall it was years of frustration, retirements and uncompetitive cars. World hero to fighting for points, stuck in a team that never took off. By 1980, exhausted and disillusioned, Emerson announced his retirement from Formula 1 at just 33 years old. Not long after, the Fittipaldi team shut down. Emerson Fittipaldi remains one of the greatest names in Brazilian and world motorsport, but his F1 career is forever marked by one of the biggest what-ifs in sports history. What if he had stayed with McLaren? We'll never know. But there's one driver who managed to do something truly unique, turn a historic victory into an eternal joke. A guy who turned raw speed into a synonym for crashing. We're talking about Pastor Maldonado, the Venezuelan driver who had plenty of talent but became forever known as Crashter, the man who crashed into anything and everything. It all began in 2010 when Maldonado won the GP2 championship in the main feeder series for Formula 1. He was aggressive, fast, determined, he looked ready to shine at the highest level. In 2011, he made it to F1 with Williams, bringing along the multi-million-dollar sponsorship of PDVSA, Venezuela's state-owned oil company. Expectations were huge: a GP2 champion, major backing, and a legendary team like Williams. But the warning signs showed up early. At the 2011 Monaco Grand Prix, Maldonado got into an accident with Lewis Hamilton and finished with 0 points.
Surely that's another penalty for Lewis Hamilton, isn't it?
Well, it's causing an avoidable accident, I think, is the phrase the stewards use.
And that wasn't an isolated case. Throughout the year, he piled up infractions, ignoring blue flags, unnecessary collisions, pit lane penalties. Still, the raw talent was there, and in 2012, he reached the high point of his career. At the Spanish Grand Prix in Barcelona, Maldonado took pole position and went on to win the race with a flawless drive, holding off Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen. It was Williams' first victory since 2004. The Venezuelan finally seemed to be living up to the hype, but the celebration ended in the most surreal way possible. Right after the race, a fire broke out in the Williams garage. A perfect image of what his career would become, a mix of glory and disaster. Because after that win, everything fell apart. The rest of 2012 was a total mess. Multiple crashes, spins and penalties, one of them once again with Hamilton. multiple mistakes, and even a heavy penalty for ignoring blue flags. It didn't take long for the nickname Crashter to stick. In 2013, he stayed with Williams, but the results were nowhere to be found. After that year, the crashes kept coming, the memes spread, and the paddock's patience ran out. Every time Maldonado went out on track, fans waited for the inevitable, and it usually came: the crash. His last season was in 2015 with Lotus. By the end of that year, PDVSA pulled their sponsorship and Maldonado left Formula One. And the harsh truth? No one really missed him. To this day, Pastor Maldonado is remembered more for his crashes than for his historic win in Barcelona. He became an eternal meme. And now, the cruelest story in modern Formula One. A driver who lost his job, his girlfriend, and even his daughter to the same guy. We're talking about Daniil Kvyat, the Russian driver who lost everything to Max Verstappen. It sounds like a Hollywood script, but it's real. It all started in 2014 when Kvyat made his F1 debut with Toro Rosso. At just 19 years old, he became only the second Russian in F1 history, and in his very first race in Australia, he finished 9th, becoming the youngest driver ever to score points in F1, breaking Sebastian Vettel's record. Throughout that season, he kept collecting points in races like Malaysia, China, and Belgium. It seemed clear Red Bull had found its next star. The plan was to let him develop at Toro Rosso, but then came the bombshell. Sebastian Vettel announced he was leaving Red Bull at the end of 2014. With no time to waste, Helmut Marko decided to promote Kvyat straight to the main Red Bull team for 2015. At just 20 years old, he was already a Red Bull driver. That year, the car wasn't great. Red Bull was far from winning races, but Kvyat delivered solid results. He even got his first podium at the Hungarian Grand Prix and finished the season 7th in the championship, 3 points ahead of Daniel Ricciardo. It looked like Red Bull had made the right call. And 2016 started even better. At the Chinese Grand Prix, Kvyat grabbed another podium, but just weeks later, everything collapsed. At his home race in Sochi, Russia, Kvyat hit Sebastian Vettel twice on the opening lap. The four-time champion exploded on the radio, and Kvyat's image took a nosedive.
I think it's maybe Ricciardo that came off worse, and there's a spin. There is a spinning Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel, and he is out at the first corner, and the first...
I'm out. Crash. Somebody hit me in the rear, turn 2, and then somebody hit me in the rear again in turn 3. For sake. Honestly, what the are we doing here?
That's when the nickname The Russian Torpedo was born. Days later, the news broke Kvyat was being demoted back to Toro Rosso. His seat at Red Bull would go to a rookie, an 18-year-old named Max Verstappen. And in Max's very first race for Red Bull in Barcelona, he won, becoming the youngest race winner in F1 history. While Max became a superstar, Kvyat was back to square one. By 2017, things got even worse. The Russian scored only 5 points all season, while his teammate Carlos Sainz earned 55. After the US Grand Prix, Red Bull made it official: Kvyat was out, replaced by Pierre Gasly. It looked like the end, but at least his personal life seemed to be going well. He started dating Kelly Piquet, daughter of 3-time F1 world champion Nelson Piquet. Then in 2019, he got a second chance at Toro Rosso. And at the German Grand Prix, just one day after his daughter Penelope was born, Kvyat pulled out of an incredible race, finishing third. It was the perfect comeback. It looked like he was finally back on track, but once again, Red Bull overlooked him. When Gasly was determined, many expected Kvyat to be promoted again, but the seat went to Alex Albon. It was the second time Red Bull passed him over, and in 2020 came the final blow. His relationship with Kelly Piquet ended. Soon after, Kelly started dating none other than Max Verstappen. Yes, the same guy who took his Red Bull seat was now taking over his personal life too. Today, Verstappen isn't just a 4-time world champion, he also has a daughter with Kelly Piquet, living exactly the life that once seemed destined for Kvyat, and playing the role of the perfect stepdad. Meanwhile, the Russian lost his F1 seat after 2020, became a reserve driver and moved on to other series, but never made it back to the main grid. From Red Bull's rising star to one of F1's most tragic stories, Daniil Kvyat lost everything, and ironically, all to the same man. Now, this next guy had huge sponsorship money and carried the hopes of America in F1, but threw it all away because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. We're talking about Scott Speed. When he arrived in 2006, he was under massive pressure. Speed was seen as America's big hope in F1, backed by Red Bull's money and marketing machine, ready to turn him into a superstar. He had a solid resume. Formula Renault champion in 2004, standout performances in A1 GP and podiums in GP2. That earned him a shot with Toro Rosso, Red Bull's junior team, at just 23 years old. Expectations were sky high. After all, the last American in F1 had been Michael Andretti back in 1993. But soon things started going wrong. At the 2006 Australian Grand Prix, Speed clashed with veteran David Coulthard, a respected figure in the paddock, and during the driver's briefing, Speed straight up cursed at Coulthard in front of everyone. A total shock, a rookie disrespecting one of the sport's most senior drivers, and Speed didn't seem to care. His ego was bigger than his sense of respect. On track, his performance wasn't impressive either. In the 2006 season, Speed didn't score a single point, while his teammate Vitantonio Luzzi managed better results in a few races. The American ended the year 20th in the championship. Still, Red Bull gave him another chance for 2007, but that's when things completely fell apart. Speed began clashing constantly with team management, especially with Toro Rosso boss Franz Tost, and it all blew up at the 2007 European Grand Prix at Nürburgring. The race was chaotic because of the rain, and Speed spun out on the wet track, retiring early. When he got back to the pits, he started angrily blaming the team, accusing them of botching his pit stop. That was the breaking point. Witnesses claimed Franz Tost confronted Speed aggressively and even pushed him, something Tost has always denied. Either way, the relationship was done. Days later, Scott Speed was officially dropped from Toro Rosso. Technically, it wasn't a firing, it was called a replacement for performance and attitude. And his replacement? None other than Sebastian Vettel, who would later become a four-time world champion. The saddest part? Scott Speed actually had talent. But in 28 F1 races, he never scored a single point. He ended up in the record books as one of the drivers with the most Grand Prix without ever scoring in modern F1 history. And in the end, it wasn't just lack of results. It was his inability to work with the team, accept criticism, and control his ego that destroyed everything. His career lasted barely a season and a half, and he never came back.